The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is, well, one of the most protracted and intractable conflicts in modern history. Its roots trace back to the early 20th century, with competing claims to the same territory. Zionist aspirations for a Jewish state in Palestine clashed with the rights of the indigenous Palestinian population. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War led to the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and the creation of the State of Israel. Subsequent wars in 1967 and 1973 further entrenched Israeli control over the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. The Oslo Accords of the 1990s offered, for a moment, a glimmer of hope for a two-state solution. However, continued settlement expansion, violence, and mistrust have made peace elusive. The period from 2023 to 2024 marked a particularly dark chapter in this long-standing conflict. Israel launched a devastating military offensive in Gaza, resulting in widespread destruction and a humanitarian catastrophe. The international community grappled with allegations of Israeli apartheid and war crimes. Meanwhile, a global movement demanding Palestinian rights and justice gained momentum. The events of this period have profound implications for the future of the region and, honestly, for the international order. In October 2023, Israel launched a military operation in Gaza in response to rocket attacks by Hamas. The scale and ferocity of the Israeli assault were, frankly, unprecedented. Over 44,000 Palestinians were killed, including thousands of civilians. Hospitals, schools, and residential areas were reduced to rubble. The already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, under Israeli blockade for over a decade, was exacerbated to catastrophic levels. The International Red Cross described the situation in Gaza as apocalyptic. The healthcare system collapsed under the weight of casualties. Food and water shortages reached critical levels. The UN estimated that over 1 million people were displaced from their homes. The sheer scale of destruction and suffering in Gaza shocked the world and sparked international outrage. While Gaza bore the brunt of Israeli military might, the West Bank also witnessed a sharp escalation in violence and repression. Israeli forces killed over 700 Palestinians in the West Bank in 2024, the highest number in 2 decades. Settler violence against Palestinians and their property continued unabated. The Israeli government accelerated its settlement expansion program, further entrenching its control over the West Bank and diminishing the prospects for a viable Palestinian state. Palestinians in the West Bank faced systematic discrimination and human rights violations. They were subject to military law, while Israeli settlers lived under Israeli civil law. Freedom of movement was severely restricted, hampering access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. The Israeli government's policies in the West Bank amounted to a system of apartheid, as argued by human rights organizations and legal experts. The international community condemned Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank. The UN Human Rights Council launched an investigation into alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. The International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials. The International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion declaring Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories illegal. These legal and diplomatic actions reflected a growing global consensus that Israel's occupation and its policies towards the Palestinians were unsustainable and violated international law. However, the Israeli government remained defiant, dismissing international criticism as biased and politically motivated. The term apartheid has increasingly been used to describe Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Human rights organizations such as Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem have issued reports accusing Israel of implementing a system of apartheid in the occupied territories and within Israel itself. This accusation centers on the systematic discrimination, segregation, and oppression faced by Palestinians, which are designed to maintain Jewish Israeli domination. The Israeli government vehemently rejects the apartheid label, arguing that Israel is a democracy that guarantees equal rights to all its citizens. However, the evidence presented by human rights groups and the growing international legal scrutiny suggests that Israel's policies and practices towards Palestinians meet the legal definition of apartheid. This debate has significant legal and political ramifications, potentially leading to sanctions and boycotts against Israel. Section 6. U.S. complicity funding and enabling occupation. The United States has long been Israel's most important ally, providing billions of dollars in military aid and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. This unwavering support has been a major obstacle to holding Israel accountable for its actions and achieving a just solution to the conflict. However, in recent years, there has been a noticeable shift in U.S. public opinion and political discourse on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A growing movement in the U.S. led by progressive activists and politicians is challenging the traditional pro-Israel consensus. This movement highlights the U.S. government's complicity in Israeli human rights abuses and calls for conditioning U.S. aid on Israel's compliance with international law. While the U.S. government's official policy remains unchanged, the growing pressure from within is forcing a reassessment of U.S.-Israel relations. Section 7. A sea change, shifting tides of public opinion. The events of 2023 and 2024, particularly the devastation in Gaza, had a profound impact on global public opinion. Images of Palestinian suffering and Israeli military might spark outrage and sympathy worldwide. Polls showed a significant increase in support for Palestinian rights and a corresponding decline in support for Israel. This shift in public opinion was particularly noticeable in the United States, where a growing number of Americans, especially young people, are questioning their country's unconditional support for Israel. This changing public sentiment is translating into concrete action. There has been a surge in activism and advocacy for Palestinian rights, with boycotts, divestment campaigns, and protests targeting Israeli institutions and companies complicit in the occupation. This growing global movement is putting pressure on governments and international organizations to take meaningful action to end the Israeli occupation and achieve a just peace. Section 8. The price of inaction. Global implications of the conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not just a regional issue, it has global implications. The ongoing occupation and the denial of Palestinian rights fuel instability and extremism in the Middle East and beyond. The conflict also undermines international law and the legitimacy of international institutions. Moreover, the double standard applied to Israel's actions, compared to other conflicts, erodes trust in the international system. The failure to achieve a just and lasting solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict comes at a high cost. It perpetuates human suffering, undermines regional stability, and damages the credibility of the international community. Addressing this conflict is not just a moral imperative, it is also a strategic necessity for a more just and peaceful world. Section 9. Paths forward towards a just and lasting peace. Achieving a just and lasting peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict requires a fundamental shift in the current paradigm. The two-state solution, once seen as the only viable option, has become increasingly difficult to achieve due to continued Israeli settlement expansion and entrenched political positions. A growing number of voices are calling for alternative solutions, such as a single democratic state in all of historic Palestine, where Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal rights and live together in peace. Regardless of the specific solution, any path to peace must be grounded in international law, justice, and human rights. It must address the root causes of the conflict, including the displacement of Palestinians in 1948, also known as the Nakba, and provide redress for past injustices. The international community has a responsibility to pressure all parties to end the occupation, cease all forms of violence, and engage in good faith negotiations to achieve a just and sustainable peace for both Palestinians and Israelis.